the United States military began major combat operations in Iran.
The Israeli army and the state of Israel set out to thwart existential threats to Israel and great threats to America and the entire world.
It was the second time in less than a year that Israel and the U.S. had attacked Iran.
This combined force of more than 400 fighter jets, 2 aircraft carriers, all these destroyers, refueling capability, they'd never seen anything like this before.
Explosions rocked multiple cities.
The Pentagon saying U.S. airstrikes have destroyed hundreds of Iran's ballistic missiles, launchers, and drones.
Within 24 hours, Iran's supreme leader and other top officials had been killed.
His removal obviously creates a massive power vacuum.
An earth-shattering moment for the Middle East.
As the conflict spreads,
we're seeing the Middle East absorb a wave of Iranian retaliation.
There is now a second front that has opened up in Lebanon.
an updated presentation of the long road to war.
We're ready to roll.
Drawing on interviews with officials, insiders, and experts on all sides.
This film's going to cover a large swath of history.
Yep. Correspondent James Jacoby traces the roots of the conflict.
You've just come out of the bomb shelter?
Yes, just out of the shelter, yes.
From the rise of Iran's regional proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas.
It was a huge threat.
To the diplomatic efforts to contain Iran's nuclear program.
The leaders of Iran must recognize that now's the time for a diplomatic solution.
The October 7th attacks.
There's an Israel before October 7th, and there is an Israel after October 7th.
To the fighting in its wake.
We will not allow those threats to come to our borders.
Annihilation, extermination. Do I need to give you numbers?
We faced an aggression by Israel and by America, and then we resisted.
Leading up to the current war.
Dozens of young girls were killed in airstrikes that hit an elementary
school.
The
U.S. and Israel pummeling Iranian missile bases.
And uncertainty gripping the region.
Intensifying military conflict, which has spiraled into a full-blown regional war.
The old order is broken. The new order is emergent.
Now on Frontline.
We've unleashed all kinds of forces that we cannot control.
Remaking the Middle East, the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
This program contains graphic imagery. Viewer discretion is advised.
When I last stood here, I spoke of the consequences of Iran developing nuclear weapons. Now, time is running out. The more Iran believes that all options are on the table, the less the chance of confrontation.
The roots of the war with Iran go back many years, to a long campaign by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
And this is why I ask you to continue to send an unequivocal message that America will never permit Iran to develop nuclear weapons.
I don't think I had a single meeting with the Prime Minister where he didn't raise his concerns about Iran, and certainly the fact that Iran was pursuing a nuclear program that might enable it to have a nuclear weapon. He was single-mindedly focused on that, and he would never let me forget it, that was his #1 priority.
What was often your response to that?
My response was that the United States largely shared that analysis and that understanding of the Iranian regime. The only question was, how would we deal with it? How would we deal with the most significant and most dangerous threat that Iran could pose, which is if it ever required a nuclear weapon, and how to make sure that didn't happen.
Netanyahu had reason to be concerned. Western intelligence services had recently uncovered a dangerous new phase in Iran's nuclear ambitions.
Western leaders in Pittsburgh this week were unhappy, but they weren't surprised.
President Obama and the leaders of France and the United Kingdom revealed what intelligence had shown was that Iran was building an underground enrichment facility at a place called Fordo.
This is not the first time that Iran has concealed information about its nuclear program.
There were a number of clocks ticking. One clock was the rate at which Iran was enriching uranium. Another clock was the rate in which they would complete the enrichment and move underground, at which point it'd be too late.
Iran denied it was building a bomb and insisted Fordo was for its civilian nuclear power program.
Never Iran was after a nuclear bomb.
Hossein Mousavian spent years as an Iranian diplomat and nuclear negotiator. Why would Iran build a nuclear facility in the side of a mountain 80 meters underground if it were only for peaceful purposes? Why do that?
The answer is very, very simple. It is because of the US, because every US president repeatedly said all options are on the table. It means the US may attack Iran. When you threaten a country for military strike, why they should not have their nuclear facilities under the ground? They would be crazy if they would not have done it.
Tough new sanctions are designed to slow Iran's nuclear ambitions. President Obama is expected to sign those penalties into law.
I'm pleased to sign into law the toughest sanctions against Iran ever passed by the United States Congress.
The Obama administration had already imposed crippling sanctions on Iran and behind the scenes pursued a series of covert cyber operations against its nuclear program.
You know, for them, you're the great Satan, we're the little Satan. For them, we are you and you're us.
But Netanyahu wanted to go further, a military strike.
The Prime Minister did not believe the Iranian nuclear program could be contained and prevented from producing a nuclear weapon without military action. So for him, it was a matter of when and who and how.
There is strong likelihood Israel will strike Iran in April, May, or June.
In early 2012, the Israeli military was planning for an attack on Iran's nuclear sites. But as the possibility of a strike grew, Netanyahu's own cabinet and intelligence agencies were divided on whether to attack.
The issue was whether right now they're building a bomb and this is the right time to do it.
Zohar Palti, head of Mossad's intelligence directorate, was arguing against it.
You are not coming and starting a war with a huge state like Iran without those discussions. And if somebody is pushing you as a professional, I want to do it, I said, okay. But you have to understand, right now, at that moment, the Iranians are not building a bomb.
The head of the Mossad was against it, the chief of staff was against it. And around the table from the professionals, I think that I was the only one who thought that this is the right moment and we should do it.
Yaakov Amadror was Netanyahu's national security advisor.
We are asking ourselves every morning one question. Will tomorrow be too late? If it is not, we don't do anything. If it is, the answer is yes, tomorrow will be too late. We have to decide what we do.
With his cabinet divided, Netanyahu turned to Obama and asked him for assurance that if Israel did go ahead, the U.S. would back them up.
What Netanyahu wants is either a green light or a yellow light to go bomb the Iranian program. And the knowledge that if the Iranians retaliated against Israel, Obama would be right with him to get into that conflict. And Obama wasn't going to give him that. He couldn't imagine how you bomb Iran without triggering a general war in the Middle East.
In the end, Netanyahu stood down. The animosity between Iran and Israel goes back almost 50 years to 1979, when Iranian revolutionaries overthrew a repressive monarchy supported by the U.S. and allied with Israel.
Ayatollah Khomeini, who was the chief ideologue of the Iranian Revolution, had written a lot about Israel in his proclamations, in his writings. He saw Israel as an aggressive outside force which had taken Palestinian territory, exiled Palestinians from their land.
And was part of this actually enshrined in the revolutionary Iranian stance on Israel?
Yes, he was part of the ideology. Eradication of Israel, restoration of land to the Palestinians was an aspiration of all Arabs, all Muslims at that point in time, and it would be the Islamic Revolution that would fulfill that aspiration.
The new Iranian regime was heavily sanctioned by the U.S., which backed Iran's rivals in the region, like Iraq and Saudi Arabia.
Iran is Shia, Iran is Persian-speaking, the Arab world's consciousness is Sunni, it's Arabic-speaking. Iran in the region is an absolute loner.
Iran would bolster its standing in the region through its support of the Palestinian cause.
No other issue gives Iran a role, a say in the Arab world, right? No other issue speaks to Arab hearts and minds than Iran's support for the Palestinians.
The devastation in the west of the city is appalling.
Initially, Iran backed Yasser Arafat's Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, which was engaged in an armed struggle against Israel from its base in Lebanon. In 1982, Israel invaded and occupied southern Lebanon to drive out the PLO. Iran went on to train and fund a Lebanese Shia group to fight against Israel. It would become known as Hezbollah, Arabic for the Party of God.
120 Americans killed today.
Soon after, a massive suicide bombing at a U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut would be widely attributed to Hezbollah, acting as a proxy for Iran.
It left really, really bitter taste in American mouths. It really hardened America's views on Iran.
These deeds make so evident the bestial nature of those who would assume power if they could have their way and drive us out of that area.
But it also taught the Iranians that there was a strategy here, that you could actually extricate the West by using, call it terrorism, call it asymmetric behavior, etc.
A huge explosion, apparently caused by a bomb, shattered the Israeli embassy in Argentina today.
Then Hezbollah units, or those militias Iran was training, started suicide bombing against Israeli targets.
We shall look for the people who are responsible for this terrible crime.
By the 1990s, Israeli intelligence was growing increasingly concerned that Iran was escalating and trying to develop a nuclear bomb, a red line for Israel, the only nuclear power in the Middle East.
There's already very deep animosity between Iran and Israel, and it's a very ideological animosity from Iran's perspective. So if we do the 1 + 1 + 1, we understand that there is a nuclear weapon being developed to be put on a missile that is probably destined to end up in Israel.
Netanyahu began calling for international action against Iran.
The most dangerous of these regimes is Iran. If this regime or its despotic neighbor Iraq were to acquire nuclear weapons, this could presage catastrophic consequences, not only for my country and not only for the Middle East, but for all of mankind.
Prime Minister Netanyahu has been after bombing Iran from early 1990s. He doesn't care about enrichment or nuclear bomb or even nuclear program. He just wants to drag the US in a war with Iran. That's it.
Throughout this time, Iran's proxy strategy was evolving.
Today, we are preparing a whole new generation which will fight the state of Israel in the future.
With Arafat and the PLO negotiating the historic Oslo peace accords with Israel, Iran began backing a new, more extreme Palestinian group, Hamas.
The car bomb was aimed at killing the maximum number of Israeli schoolchildren. Militants belonging to the Islamic group Hamas said they carried out the attack.
When the Oslo Agreement is signed, most Palestinians said, let's give this a chance. But there was that core constituency among Palestinians who said, the peace process is a sham, it can never succeed, only armed struggle can liberate Palestine, and Hamas became the embodiment of that sentiment.
Hamas's founding declaration called for the destruction of Israel, and it violently opposed a two-state solution.
In these decades of the 1990s, there's only one country, and since then, effectively, there has been only one country that continues to arm militias against Israel, that continues to not accept the two-state solution, and that is the Islamic Republic of Iran.
In 2003, after the U.S. invasion of Iraq, Iran seized the chance to expand its regional influence even farther.
This starts supporting, arming, funding, and in fact cultivating militias and political groups in countries around the region, and it defines that as part of what becomes known in the security lingo of Iran as forward defense. The idea is that we will fight in Lebanon, we will fight in Syria, we will fight in Palestine, so that we don't have to fight in Iran.
In time, this network of militias would become known as the Axis of Resistance, from the Houthis opposing Saudi influence in Yemen to Shia fighters in Iraq. The Iranian government denies the groups act as proxies, insisting they are independent organizations all fighting against Israel, which to this day it says is an illegitimate state occupying Palestinian land.
We have supported, the Palestinian people in their struggle to end the occupation in Palestine.
Majid Takht Ravanchi is Iran's deputy foreign minister. Iran has supported, with both training and military support and money, certain regional actors. Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. The Israelis and the Americans describe this strategy as building an axis of resistance. They see it as an offensive strategy.
The axis of resistance, you mentioned the axis of resistance. Axis of resistance against whom? Against the occupation. The Israelis and the Americans have been, floating this idea that the axis of resistance is against America or against Israel. They do not say the fact that the axis of resistance was in response to occupation, in response to more than 70 years of Israeli occupation of Palestine. If they want to see an end to resistance, they should end the occupation, pure and simple.
The Iranian objective, and it was not only a propaganda, was to remove the great Satan, which is the United States, from the Middle East, and to wipe Israel off the map. So death to America, death to Israel.
Amos Yadlin was the head of Israeli military intelligence in the years the proxy network was expanding.
And basically, as chief of intelligence, I saw three main efforts. One is the proxy, supporting Hezbollah, supporting the Palestinian terrorists, the Houthis, the Assad regime, the Shia militia in Iraq. Second, ballistic missiles. And then the nuclear.
Now, the professor was killed by a remote-controlled bomb.
Israel began engaging in a shadow war of its own.
Two of Iran's top nuclear scientists were targeted by hit squads
against Iran's nuclear program.
Two men on a motorcycle stuck a magnetic bomb to the door, then detonated it as they pulled away.
If there is someone who is very important in the process, and without him it will be delayed for a while, he will be eliminated.
Cyber attacks, assassinations.
Cyber attacks, assassinations, blowing some tools inside the system. Agents which are going in and putting explosives here and there. It was understood it cannot destroy but it can delay it. And when you buy time in the Middle East, you buy everything.
The leaders of Iran must recognize that now's the time for a diplomatic solution, because a coalition stands united in demanding that they meet their obligations, and we will do what is necessary to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon.
By 2013, having refused to support an Israeli military strike on Iran the year before, President Obama was now pursuing his own strategy. He wanted to negotiate.
When we set up the early stages of the negotiations, it was very secret. It was a very small group. I was chief of staff to the president at the time. There were half a dozen people who knew that the conversation was going on.
Israel was not included in the talks. It found out through its own intelligence.
It was a type of an implosion. We're confronted with this reality in which our principal ally has negotiated behind our backs for 7 months with our worst enemy. Now that is hard to square.
And when it learned about this, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu was furious. He sees this highly sensitive, secretive intelligence coming from Tehran. The Iranians are happy. The American delegates are making concession after concession. And it leads, I think, naturally to harshen the line against the US government and say, this is a very bad deal. You are going to make a very bad deal.
This is a bad deal. A very, very bad deal. It's the deal of the century for Iran. It's a very dangerous and bad deal for peace and the international community.
President Obama is going to speak today at 7 a.m. on the Iranian deal. We will speak.
Today, after 2 years of negotiations, the United States, together with our international partners, has achieved something that decades of animosity has not. A comprehensive long-term deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
In the summer of 2015, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA for short, was signed by the US, Iran, and 5 other countries over Israel's furious objections.
What a stunning, historic mistake.
It restricted Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for lifting economic sanctions and put in place intensive monitoring by international inspectors.
The objective of the agreement inside the Obama White House was to make sure that the Iranians always were at least a year away from being able to produce a weapon, on the theory that if they ran for it, we'd see them and there would be political time to react.
It cuts off all of Iran's pathways to a bomb.
There were problems with this agreement. The provisions expired too early. The Iranians demanded that they get dwindled down over time. By 2025, as we speak today, they were supposed to be allowed to produce more and more uranium. By 2030, the agreement would end.
At some point, the question is, if you want to stop something as significant as Iran getting a nuclear weapon, is that a worthy objective? Are you better off with no deal or the best deal you can get? We thought, and I continue to believe, that the best deal you can get was something that left the United States, Israel, and the world safer.
I mean, to those who would say that a deal was better than no deal, how do you respond to that?
Always deal is better than a war, but it should be a good deal. That wasn't a good deal.
The Israelis were upset that the deal also gave Iran access to billions of dollars by unfreezing its bank accounts and allowing it to sell oil. Money, they said, would embolden the regime and its proxies.
The notion that Iran got the money as a result of sanctions relief and spent on certain groups or certain parties in the Middle East, that is far from the truth. In fact, we spent lots of money that we received from the sanctions relief on our economy. JCPOA was welcomed not only in Iran, but by the whole international community as a success story of diplomacy.
In spite of Iran's denials, the so-called axis of resistance grew in the wake of the deal. At the center of the axis was Iran's most powerful military strategist, General Qasem Soleimani.
Qasem Soleimani was a truly irreplaceable guy. He did something that is actually rare in modern history. He was able to build a multinational army of tens of thousands of people, of Afghans, of Syrians, of Iraqis, of Palestinians, who would all fight under the command of Iran. This is not something that you learn in military school. It's not something that you learn from a book. It was something that Soleimani had been able to bring about through years of experience.
The most formidable force of all was Hezbollah in Lebanon. It came to be considered the best armed non-state actor in the world.
Militarily speaking, Hezbollah is a bigger threat. It has a lot more fighters, more advanced capabilities than other proxies. But it is more, I'd say, controlled by Iran and also more deterred by Israel. Hamas is a different kind of proxy. Hamas is more independent. It's a Palestinian resistance organization in terroristic means, but it has its own ethos and is more independent in its decisions. It is accepting funding and training and equipment from Iran because Iran is willing to support it, but they have their own motivations and their own decision-making.
Palestinians will vote for a new parliament, and the results could have a major impact on relations with Israel and matters of war and peace.
By now, Hamas was a political force as well as a military one.
The sweeping victory by Hamas is being described as a political earthquake.
In 2006, it had swept national elections and then seized control of Gaza in a civil war.
Hamas has done a lot of damage to our prospects, including the coup d'etat they done in Gaza, and that did really undermine Palestinian national unity and Palestinian international standing, of course.
Hamas gunmen seized control of the rival Fatah government and security offices.
The Palestinian Authority, heir to Arafat's PLO, and longtime participants in the peace process with Israel, retreated to the West Bank.
Gaza becomes a fortress for an organization whose founding charter talks about killing Jews and eliminating Israel, and they are now not just a terrorist organization in Gaza, but the governing organization in Gaza. And that means that the Israelis have to figure out how to deal with them.
The Erez crossing point between Gaza and Israel is now barred to almost all Palestinians.
The Israeli government imposed a blockade on Gaza. It said it was trying to stop Hamas from bringing in weapons and prevent its fighters from crossing into Israel.
The civilian population are facing increasing desperation and misery.
But it also trapped the population.
Israel says that Gazans will not starve on a more basic diet.
The notion that you could keep 2 million people locked up indefinitely with no real economy, who are entirely dependent on Israel opening and closing the border to allow movement of goods and people in, where majority of the people are now impoverished, I think was not only absurd, but also quite cruel.
Hamas, with support from Iran, fired rockets and mortars into Israel. Israel launched airstrikes on Gaza.
I don't suggest that the number of casualties be the determinant of what is proportionate and who's in the right.
Benjamin Netanyahu used the violence to amplify his long-standing concerns about prospects for a Palestinian state.
Netanyahu believes that if you have a Palestinian state in anywhere approximating the 67 borders, the potential for peace is zero, that the capacity for Israel to maintain its security, even in the state it's in now, will be radically diminished, that Hezbollah to its north will be stronger, the problem of Gaza will not be in any way remotely solved. Syria, Iran, shall I go on?
Rockets are still being fired into southern Israel.
But Netanyahu also thought the threats on Israel's borders could be contained without engaging in all-out wars.
The whole building demolished. A member of Hamas lived there, but had left the day before with his family.
For years, most notably in Gaza, he would pursue a fateful strategy known as mowing the grass.
So the idea was, from time to time, there will be a round of hostilities. Hamas will be beaten hard. This will establish deterrence. Let's keep them on a very low level of capabilities.
This notion that every so often there would need to be predictable rounds of violence, mowing the grass, as Israelis call it, only to result in reinstating the status quo that existed before the violence, was an untenable situation.
The philosophy was that Israel doesn't want to go to a big war. Most of the decision makers in Israel, with uniform and without uniform, thought that to go to war is a mistake. I thought that the mistake is not to initiate a war. And that was the biggest mistake. We allowed Hamas and Hezbollah to be very strong organizations. After the 7th of October, it was understood by the establishment in Israel that we made a huge mistake allowing the beast to grow close to Israel.
Thank you.
The volatile dynamic in the region would begin to shift with the rise of a new American president.
I speak to you today as a lifelong supporter and true friend of Israel. My number one priority is to dismantle the disastrous deal with Iran.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will meet with President Trump today.
That was welcome news to Benjamin Netanyahu, who was one of the first world leaders to meet with Trump at the White House.
Mr. Netanyahu says he's looking forward to a stronger alliance between the U.S. and Israel.
Netanyahu arrived with a plan to create a unified front against Iran, a vision for a new Middle East, where Israel made peace deals with its Arab neighbors.
Netanyahu felt very strongly that that's something we should pursue.
We can seize an historic opportunity.
And I would say, pushed it pretty hard.
And I believe that under your leadership, this change in our region creates an unprecedented opportunity to strengthen security and advance peace.
It was a radical idea that challenged decades of conventional wisdom about the Middle East.
The dogma was basically there'll be no peace between Israel and its Arab neighbors unless and until you solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
And I believe that the great opportunity for peace comes from a regional approach, from involving our newfound Arab partners.
Trump liked the idea, and on his first trip overseas, courted Iran's rivals in the Gulf.
Until the Iranian regime is willing to be a partner for peace, all nations of conscience must work together to isolate Iran, deny it, funding for terrorism, cannot do it, and pray for the day when the Iranian people have the just and righteous government they so richly deserve.
He had a receptive audience.
We focused on the Iranian threat, which our Gulf partners felt very acutely. They had viewed the Iran nuclear deal as a betrayal. And the president comes in and says, we're going to stand up to Iran together. We're going to counter Iran together. We're going to get out of the Iran nuclear deal. And this is what our Arab partners and Israel were waiting to hear after 8 years of the Obama administration.
President Trump is reviewing whether the U.S. should stay in the Iran nuclear deal or cancel it.
President Trump's efforts to get out of the deal would get a boost from an Israeli intelligence operation inside Iran.
It was about 2 years in the making by the Mossad until the night of January 31st, 2018.
This heist was like the most brilliant, movie-worthy operation. There's this warehouse in a nondescript part of Tehran. The Israelis figure out that it houses the entire nuclear archive, and they do a raid on it. They ship this stuff out when they figured the Iranians wouldn't be looking. Then they begin pouring through it.
I was leading the team that analyzed the findings of the nuclear archives once it arrived, providing us with a comprehensive understanding of Iran's past nuclear weapons activities.
Iran lied. Big time.
Netanyahu seized on it.
This is where they kept the atomic archives, right here. Now, from the outside, this was an innocent-looking compound. It looks like a dilapidated warehouse. But from the inside, it contained Iran's secret atomic archives locked in massive files.
The idea behind the press conference was that we have this amazingly important information to tell the world about Iran.
55,000 pages. Another 55,000 files.
What was the bottom line? Prior to 2003, there was an active bomb project. After 2003, not so much.
Incriminating blueprints.
It left you with very little doubt that the Iranians were trying to deceive the inspectors about past nuclear activity. But that didn't tell you very much about the present day.
Again, you don't have to read Farsi to understand this. This is U-235, that's enrich uranium.
Netanyahu spun this very skillfully to say to the inspectors, the Iranians are pulling your chain.
Was there any evidence in this trove of documents that the Israelis obtained in Tehran that the Iranians were out of compliance with the nuclear deal that Obama had struck with them?
Well, Iran was in technical compliance with the deal. But if the Iranian regime was serious about its nuclear program being peaceful, then what are they doing keeping a warehouse full of tens of thousands of pages on how to build a nuclear weapon and not disclosing it to the Obama administration?
Iran continues to lie.
The Iranian government called Netanyahu's press conference childish and ridiculous.
Arif said this.
We never wanted to produce a bomb.
Yes, you did. Yes, you do. In the atomic archive.
And claimed that the documents were fake.
The nuclear deal.
With all due respect, sir, what was the purpose, what was the reason Iran would have a warehouse in Tehran in which there were documents about how to build a bomb?
No, I cannot, concur with the news that that warehouse was full of, documents related to so-called Iranian nuclear weapon program. The Israelis needed to create certain documents so that they could persuade President Trump in terms of leaving the JCPOA.
The most important value of the press conference was a way of giving more ammunition, adding fuel to fire to say that this was an awful deal.
The nuclear deal gives Iran a clear path to an atomic arsenal.
In that press conference, Prime Minister Netanyahu's most important audience was President Trump.
President Trump will make his decision on what to do with the nuclear deal. I'm sure he'll do the right thing.
It happened a week after the press conference.
I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
He'd go on to impose severe sanctions and boast about it on Twitter.
After we got out of the deal, we reimposed economic sanctions. Trump called it maximum pressure.
What was the strategy of maximum pressure? What was the actual aim of it?
If you put enough pressure on Iran economically, the hope was, at least my hope was, the people would rise and say, we're not going to put up with this anymore. You spent billions of dollars on nuclear weapons, on supporting terrorist groups. People of Iran have not benefited at all, and we're done with it.
America will not be held hostage to nuclear blackmail.
President Trump made a very big mistake. He destroyed the mutual trust, mutual confidence, backing of the negotiations or endeavors, not only Iranian endeavors, but also all of the international community. Because after the JCPOA, all of the international community welcomed it. And President Trump destroyed all of these achievements in international arena.
Inside Iran, Trump's move emboldened hardliners in the government and military.
I think what the Revolutionary Guard took away from Trump coming out of the deal was that their belief that the United States never intended to make peace with Iran was validated. So the wing of the regime that argued that the only way to back the United States off is by being aggressive had won, and they became empowered. And that would continue all the way to eventually the Israel-Iran war.
From Iran's president, an ominous threat. Hassan Rouhani delivered an almost instantaneous response.
Tehran warns it may restart its uranium enrichment program on a, quote, industrial scale.
No longer constrained by Obama's deal, Iran would start increasing its uranium enrichment.
When the U.S. withdrew, I wrote and I said many times that more sanctions and pressures using the Iranian nuclear issue would lead to more enrichment, and Iran will increase the capacity and the level of enrichment to show to the U.S. that they are not going to capitulate under pressure and they will resist.
ما الان بالای تقریبا داریم به 6 کیلو میرسیم، 5.5 فکر میکنم حجم غنیسازی اورانیوم.
After we left the Iran nuclear deal, it wasn't a surprise that Iran started increasing its enrichment levels. We expected that to happen. But we thought that that illustrated the problem. What does it say about the Iran nuclear deal that Iran is able to restart it so quickly and to increase its enrichment levels to such a degree?
During the first Trump term, Iran's nuclear capabilities continue, if not accelerate. The proxies grow stronger. So what was the net effect of maximum pressure during the first Trump term?
I don't think we applied maximum pressure. I think it's great rhetoric, but it didn't really work. We had to do more. We should have done more to undermine the regime in Iran.
Iran's top general, Qasem Soleimani, taunted Trump.
We had a clash of personalities. The bombastic Soleimani with his global fame, certainly regional fame, and President Trump. His favorite word is the tough guy. They start posting memes about each other, Games of Thrones memes, and Soleimani starts giving speeches. He calls him Trump the gambler.
به شما میگویم آقای ترامپ قمارباز.
And he used this phrase. There's kind of a bit of a cheesy line. It's almost like a B movie in Hollywood, but the Iranian military leaders love to repeat it, which is, you started this war, we will finish it.
این جنگ را شما شروع میکنید اما پایانش را ما ترسیم میکنیم.
The heated words turned into action.
U.S. intelligence indicates the unprecedented attack on Saudi oil fields originated from Iran.
Iran and its network of militias launched a wave of attacks in the region.
And this intelligence over recent weeks had led them to believe that Iran or its proxies may have had a
Soleimani was also stepping up his support for Hamas.
Soleimani used money, guns, effectively an unlimited blank check, giving them suitcases full of cash, giving them advanced military equipment, not just any military equipment, logistical, military trainings, which at the time didn't all look to be relevant. Some of these trainings included attacks from the sea. They included paraglider attacks, tactics that were later used in October 7, 2023.
The Trump administration was growing increasingly concerned about Soleimani.
He was a threat. He was a threat to us, and he was a threat to U.S. citizens across the region. And that threat rose as we went into the final months of 2019.
There came a time when the intelligence was fairly clear that General Soleimani was plotting a mass casualty attack against American troops in the Middle East. President Trump's National Security Cabinet concluded that the risks of not taking action outweighed the risks of taking action.
Iran's military commander, General Qasem
Soleimani killed in a U.S. drone strike outside of Baghdad's international airport.
Missiles from the U.S. drone hit their convoy as it left the airport.
We elected ultimately to strike him in Baghdad because we could strike him there with minimal collateral damage, which was always of concern to us.
Last night, at my direction, the United States military successfully executed a flawless precision strike that killed the #1 terrorist anywhere in the world, Qasem Soleimani.
I was the officer responsible for it. It was a CENTCOM-controlled operation using Special Operations Task Force.
Some of the reaction pouring in today, big threats towards the United States from senior Iranian officials, including Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, who called all of this a heinous crime committed by the United States.
We won that round. We took a major asset off the table, an asset that the Iranians miss to this day as you and I speak. and it has affected their planning in every way that you can affect a nation's planning.
In the wake of Soleimani's death, the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, was widely viewed as the most powerful figure in the Axis.
وأن أقصى ما يمكن أن نتطلع إليه هو أن نقتل في سبيل الله عز وجل.
Nasrallah sees this as a alliance or network of like-minded groups who would basically create an arc of fire around Israel. So you have Hezbollah, something in the West Bank, maybe down the road in Jordan, Hamas in Gaza, and then you have Iranian militia presence in Syria. You have these militias in Iraq. You have Houthis that are being armed to the teeth with long-range missiles, who also were being trained and mentored by Nasrallah and Hezbollah.
But as Iran and its proxies were strengthening their arc of fire,
at the White House today, Israel and two Arab nations signed a
Israel was making alliances of its own.
normalize relations and bring them closer together.
Trump and Netanyahu's vision for the region was becoming a reality. Two Arab countries, the UAE and Bahrain, announced they would normalize relations with Israel in what was known as the Abraham Accords.
After decades of division and conflict, we mark the dawn of a new Middle East. Thanks to the great courage of the leaders of these three countries.
This day is a pivot of history. It heralds a new dawn of peace.
The interest of the Gulf countries to come to the Abraham Accords is very much connected with Iran's influence in the region. They feel threatened by Iran. They want security assurances from the United States. They see how Israel is a gateway to the American public and to the American administration. And they are being pressured by the influence of Iran and by the way that Iran is sometimes attacking. And now they understand that they might need this alliance with Israel.
It was the first peace treaty between Israel and any Arab country in almost 30 years.
They're doing all this without any real movement on the Palestinian issue. For Netanyahu, this was the crown jewel of his legacy to a certain degree.
Left out, the Palestinians, abandoned by their Arab neighbors, powerless to do anything but protest.
It was primarily a confirmation to us that Israel is truly not interested in peace. That the only agenda is to completely undermine, avoid, bypass the issue, which is the issue of Palestine, by almost working, that is Netanyahu, like a magician, you know, abracadabra. Here you go, you see, I'm normalizing and I'm opening new relations, I'm going all over the Middle East and the Arab world without having to resolve the issue, which is the Palestinian issue.
در پایان عرض بکنم راجع به این خیانتی که متاسفانه دولت
Iran's leader used the Abraham Accords as a rallying cry.
هم به دنیای اسلام خیانت کرد هم به دنیای عرب.
It's the perfect opportunity for Ayatollah Khamenei to come in and say, don't worry, there is a state that will continue to champion you, that will continue to fight Israel, that will buck this regional trend, that is not motivated by material interests. There's nothing that they could give Iran that would have it give up the cause of Palestine or to become friends with the Jewish state. Khamenei takes his mantle and uses it to expand the axis of resistance against the Arab states and Israel.
The International Atomic Energy Agency presented its latest report.
Iran has been openly breaching these limits for some time now, apparently in retaliation for the US withdrawing from that nuclear deal.
The consequences of leaving the nuclear deal continued to rack up.
Uranium stockpile is now 12 times its limit under the agreement.
And would soon confront a new presidential administration, one more inclined to re-engage with Iran.
The U.S. has said it is ready to restart nuclear talks with Iran.
We're prepared to re-engage in negotiations on Iran's nuclear program.
Iran's foreign minister saying that the U.S. must lift all sanctions before Iran will make any moves.
President Biden began trying to get Iran back to the negotiating table. He would eventually ease some of Trump's so-called maximum pressure sanctions. I mean, by not enforcing sanctions, though, wasn't the Biden administration basically empowering Iran during this period of time?
President Biden was trying to demonstrate his willingness to return to an agreement that would lift some sanctions, lift additional sanctions, but Iran would have to abide by certain commitments. Iran wasn't willing to abide by those commitments. So at the end of the day, there was no agreement.
With the U.S. and Iran at an impasse, Israel was consumed by crises at home.
For allegedly accepting bribes and a breach of trust.
Netanyahu was embroiled in a corruption scandal that would reshape his government.
His own personal affairs lead eventually to 3 different indictments on criminal charges, including bribery, charges that he has always claimed are bogus and are an attempt to persecute him.
To survive politically, he formed a coalition with Israel's most extreme right-wing parties.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has inaugurated the most far-right government in the country's history.
The appointment of Bezalel Smotrich as finance minister and minister of the defense ministry and Itamar Ben-Gvir as a minister of national security was a real sea change.
Itamar Ben-Gvir supports relaxing open-fire rules against Palestinian rioters.
Ben-Gvir actually pulled out a gun while on a recent visit to a predominantly Palestinian neighborhood.
We had never seen those extreme parts of the Israeli political system present in the Israeli cabinet before. And because Prime Minister Netanyahu was so dependent on them for his political survival, it raised the question of whether these 2 extremist figures would really be the ones pulling the strings of Israeli policy.
The new government faced pushback as it tried to consolidate power.
Controversial plans to overhaul the justice system. It was a sudden outpouring of rage,
triggering weeks of massive protests. An estimated 300,000 democracy. Thank you very much.
That led to, I would say, the biggest wave of protests in the history of the country, and probably the most severe political crisis and social crisis in the history of the country. In many meetings, the chiefs of Israeli intelligence warned Netanyahu that the political crisis and its effect on the military are perceived by Israeli enemy as the time to take more aggressive initiative against Israel.
There were actually quite a lot of warnings saying, look, we're creating here the perfect storm. And at one point or another, one of our enemies would use that to start a war because they would feel that we're weak and that we're consumed with our own domestic political problems.
That summer, Hamas dispatched officials to Iran and Lebanon.
Hamas is pitching an idea to Tehran and Beirut. And the idea is we can destroy Israel. We will invade Israel. And then Hezbollah, you'll shoot in the north and you'll invade Israel. Then Iran will join. And then we'll have volunteers coming from across the Muslim world.
The Iranians did not know the timing. They may have known the overall intent, but not the timing. And that was mostly for operational security on Hamas's part.
There's no question. The Abraham Accords.
Throughout that summer, Iran and its proxies were also hearing of other plans, that Netanyahu and Biden were preparing to bring Saudi Arabia into the Abraham Accords.
Khamenei was certainly very worried that Saudi Arabia could establish ties with Israel, not only because of the fact of the relations, because that would have further isolated Iran, would have opened Israel's presence in the Persian Gulf even more. But part of that deal would be the deepening of American-Saudi relationship.
By late September, Netanyahu was talking about it on the world stage.
He said, we are going to have peace with Saudi Arabia, and the Palestinians should not have a veto on that.
I've long sought to make peace with the Palestinians. But I also believed that we must not give the Palestinians a veto over new peace treaties with Arab states.
Which is, in a different language, from my point of view, the Palestinians can off. Sorry, but excuse my French.
Now, for years, my approach to peace was rejected by the so-called experts. Well, they were wrong. Peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia will truly create a new Middle East.
The leaders of Hamas, as they explained to us, They see this and they understand that in a moment, the Palestinian issue will be completely taken off the world agenda. Now, they came to the conclusion, a jihadist conclusion, of blood, of murder, of massacre. They want a regional war.
This morning, Hamas opened a murderous surprise attack against the state of Israel
and sent dozens of fighters across the country's heavily fortified border area of the Gaza Strip.
We failed. We failed. The IDF was built in order to prevent such incidents.
The militants infiltrating multiple cities in Israel.
Such scenes we saw, raping and killing Jews for the sake of being Jews. We were thinking that we can contain this threat. We can live our lives and they will live their lives and that's it. And we allowed this threat to grow and grow to the extent they launched the attack on October 7th.
The architect of the attacks was Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader in Gaza.
It became clearer over time that Sinwar had really jumped the gun. Now, it's not to say that Hamas had not discussed such prospects with Hezbollah, with Iran, but on the day of, it appears, from everything we've seen, that he really decided to go for broke himself without coordination.
October 7th would transform Israel's security strategy and the region.
It was understood in Israel that we have to change the whole sentiment and the way that we are acting in our neighborhood. We will not allow our enemies to build capabilities that might endanger the existence of Israel. And it was a very important lesson from the 7th of October. But we will take it on about the future of the Middle East. The mistake that we did before the 7th of October will not repeat itself.
It's been a day that has shocked this country. Their defenses breached with ease.
The scale of these attacks, waves of attacks, are absolutely stunning.
Israel is at war. We didn't want this war. It was forced upon us in the most brutal and savage way. But though Israel didn't start this war, Israel will finish it.
Israel says it's on war footing. Now the mission is to destroy Hamas.
Israel itself is striking back, launching its own airstrikes.
Within hours, Israel began bombing Gaza, and Hamas called for the rest of Iran's axis to join the fight.
إخواننا في المقاومة الإسلامية في لبنان وإيران واليمن والعراق وسوريا. هذا هو اليوم الذي تلتحم فيه مقاومتكم مع أهلكم في فلسطين.
Netanyahu feared an all-out attack was imminent.
So the Prime Minister and I spoke that day. He laid out his concern about how Iran and its proxy forces beyond Hamas would try to take advantage of this situation and hit Israel hard at a moment when Israel, frankly, was reeling.
Our ask from the Biden administration was first and foremost to send deterrent messages in words and deeds to both Iran and Hezbollah. Our senior leadership were concerned about Hezbollah, lest Hezbollah follow Hamas.
The Lebanese militant group Hezbollah has gotten involved in the fighting.
On October 8th, Hezbollah began to fire rockets into northern Israel.
There was an exchange of fire between Hezbollah and Israel.
A senior Hezbollah official pledged solidarity with the Palestinians who carried out attacks on Israel.
The nation is with you. Our heart, minds, souls, our history and guns and rockets and all that we have is with you.
An escalation along one of the most volatile borders in the region.
October 7th really
was a point at which this circle of fire went into offensive action against Israel. The balance seemed to be in Iran's favor. I mean, his axis was ascendant, had Israel on his back heel.
It seems clear we are heading for a wider war.
The U.S. is moving a carrier strike group and more fighter jets to the region.
I have to say, we came perilously close to a much broader regional conflict in that first week, in the fog and the friction and the unknowns. The lack of clear information of exactly what was happening, honestly, in Israel, in Beirut, in Tehran, in Washington, it's a classic security dilemma where one side sees another side moving and believes the worst is coming and might act preemptively to stop it, when in fact, the other side might just be moving to more defensible positions, or they're moving because they're uncertain.
In Tehran, the Ayatollah praised the October 7th attacks.
بدانند سران و تصمیم گیران رژیم قاصد و حمایت کنندگانشان که همین کار بلای بزرگتری بر سر آنها خواهد آورد.
But he denied Iran was involved.
We totally reject the notion that Iran was aware of the attack. We totally reject the notion that there were meetings between Iranians and others on this.
With the violence threatening to spiral into a full-scale regional war, President Biden warned Israel's enemies to stay out of the fight.
To any country, any organization, anyone thinking of taking advantage of this situation, I have one word: don't. Don't.
Biden referred to Iran, Hezbollah, though even not saying this explicitly. He said, I'm saying to anyone, be aware. Do not dare to join this fight, because then, at the end of that, you'll find the mighty firepower of the United States.
In the weeks that followed, the Houthis fired on Israel from Yemen. Shia militias in Iraq hit U.S. bases, and Hezbollah and Israel continued to exchange fire. But the clashes didn't escalate further.
We kept the engagement between us and Hezbollah in a very low fire. That was the interest of Hezbollah as well.
Nasrallah and Hezbollah wanted to support Hamas symbolically, as well as put pressure on Israel on its northern border in order to prevent IDF to fully focus on Gaza. But Nasrallah also had to think about what does it mean for his community. If Israel began to hit Lebanon with a lot of missiles or invaded Lebanon, Nasrallah believed that actually he could contain the level of engagement.
Israel's ground war has started. Their mission to root out Hamas and also to find hostages. More than 200 hostages are still being held.
Hamas says its fighters are involved in clashes with Israeli forces.
For the moment, Israel was focusing on Gaza.
They have moved on more than 600 targets and tried to target Hamas infrastructure, in particular the network of tunnels.
The IDF has said repeatedly there are command centers stationed underneath hospitals in Gaza.
For people in Gaza, a growing humanitarian crisis.
Israel has cut off all food, water, and power.
A panel of UN experts is warning of the potential for war crimes.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called those comments hogwash and said Israel doesn't target civilians and any innocents who die in Gaza are, quote, collateral damage.
More than 11,000 Palestinians have been killed in the war.
By December, amid mounting civilian casualties and international criticism of Israel's campaign, Biden's team was growing alarmed about Netanyahu's strategy. What was the vision? What was the war aim as Netanyahu was stating it?
None. I mean, it was basically total victory without definition of what total victory actually was. We have to go in, we have to destroy, and you try to have that next layer of conversation, like, to do what? right? And, you know, he would publicly make the case, total victory. We can't talk about the day after until we've achieved total victory.
There is no substitute for victory. And our victory will be your victory.
Peace and security require total victory over Hamas.
What does total victory actually mean?
I don't know what it means, but I will tell you that the fact that we did not present a coherent strategy was not because we did not discuss it. I think it was more due to political reasons.
Some far-right members of Netanyahu's coalition fiercely opposed any ceasefire or compromise that would leave Palestinians running Gaza.
We knew that Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, the two most extreme ministers, ultimately did not want the war to end, or at least for them the war meant total victory and then Israeli reoccupation and settlement of Gaza.
That was not the position of the government, that was not the position of the prime minister, and that was not the position of the defense establishment and all of us who were involved in this process. But it created a lot of pressures in our government.
Netanyahu, we believed, was concerned that if he agreed to any post-conflict option that didn't allow for Israel to maintain control over Gaza, to establish settlements, he would risk seeing them bolt the coalition and collapse the government.
Thousands of Palestinians have been killed, wounded, or are missing.
These are disproportionate attacks that could be war crimes.
With no end in sight, some of the president's advisors argued he should break with Netanyahu and publicly criticize how the war was being fought.
There was some openness, both at the State Department and at the White House, to this idea, and they did discuss it. I think ultimately the concern was that if we demonstrated daylight with Prime Minister Netanyahu, it would embolden Israel's enemies. So Hamas would be encouraged because they would think the U.S.-Israel relationship was breaking up. Hezbollah would escalate. Additional proxies would get involved. Iran might see an opportunity.
6 months into the Gaza offensive, it appeared that a full-scale regional war had been averted. Then, in April, Israel made a provocative move against Iran.
Iran is accusing Israel of attacking its embassy complex in Syria.
Eliminating one of Tehran's most senior military commanders.
Killed in what they described as an Israeli airstrike which targeted...
Israel attacked Iranian embassy in Syria. They killed high-level IRGC commanders. It was an attack on Iranian territory.
The Iranians took it as we hit their own sovereignty because they claimed it was their embassy building. It wasn't. It was a building next to the embassy, and we made our calculations, and we were ready for any implications for this action.
Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has led Eid prayers in Tehran. He used his speech to call for retaliation against Israel.
رژیم خبیث اشتباه کرد. در این قضیه باید تنبیه بشود و تنبیه خواهد شد.
Were you concerned that basically Israel had just escalated the war?
I was concerned that as a result of what Israel had done, there would be an Iranian reaction, and that could set off a chain of events that could cause an explosion into a wider war. And I think one thing that now sitting here in 2025, it's hard for people who weren't living this day to day to appreciate is we were picking up the paper every morning and there were headlines, all out Middle East war on the horizon, on the edge, region teeters, on the brink. We were living through a period where the possibility that the United States of America would be dragged into another major war in the Middle East was real.
Within days, intelligence reports showed the Iranians were preparing a major response. Biden and Netanyahu got on the phone.
Prime Minister Netanyahu said to the president, we'd like your support, we'd like your help to be able to defend against this. And the president said, I think you misjudged the consequences of your strike. You didn't think Iran was going to gear up for a big attack, and they are. Nonetheless, I, Joe Biden, am going to tell my military to make sure that we help defend you so that an Iranian attack on Israel does not succeed.
Tonight, we are in uncharted, unprecedented territory.
Iranian drones on their way, apparently, to attack Israel.
In April 2024, Iran finally does something that it had never done before. It attacks Israel directly. It finds a justification to say since Iranian diplomatic territory in Damascus was attacked, Iran could now attack Israeli territory directly.
Israel's air defenses called to action. Fighter jets battled waves of Iranian drones and missiles.
This is the first time that Iran has done a direct conventional military attack against Israel. They had used their proxies, they had used terrorism, they had used every dirty trick in the books, but never had they directed their military to load up a bunch of missiles and drones and fire them from the territory of Iran to the territory of Israel. So this was a watershed moment.
Almost all of the drones and missiles were destroyed before they reached their targets by a military coalition including Israel, the United States, and several Arab countries.
The regime tries to claim that this Operation True Promise One was a grand success, that it had given Israelis a lesson, that it had pushed the Zionists back, that it has shown that Iran was this heroic state that would stand up to the Israelis.
They did not want to kill Israelis. They did not want to create big mess. They just wanted to give a message that if we are attacked, we would reciprocate.
The Iranians have said they didn't intend to kind of inflict damage in that April attack, and that it was really just more to send a message. What's your response to that?
You don't launch 200 projectiles, including ballistic missiles, into a state for not making damage. Because they failed, they said that they didn't intend to make any damage. You don't do it if you don't want to make damage on the other side.
Once again, President Biden urged restraint.
The message from the US administration was, you were very successful defensively, take the win and don't strike back.
The Israelis decided to retaliate, but they were very careful not to strike the Iranian nuclear program.
Sources characterizing the early morning strikes as limited.
Iran was dismissive, saying this was just a tiny drone attack.
They hit key cities and areas around it, but not at military bases that were nuclear related. You have to think of these as warning shots of saying, we can reach you when we want to.
In Gaza, the war ground on. 7 months after October 7th, Hamas continued to hold hostages.
Tens of thousands of Israelis rallied in protest at delays in getting the hostages out of Gaza.
And the Israeli military had killed more than 30,000 Palestinians.
Breaking this morning, the International Criminal Court is seeking arrest warrants for Israeli and Hamas leaders, including
Prime Minister Netanyahu on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Mr. Netanyahu described the move as absurd.
כראש ממשלת ישראל, אני דוחה בשאט נפש את ההשוואה של התובע בהאג בין ישראל הדמוקרטית לבין רבי המרצחים של החמאס.
The Biden administration's concerns about Israel's campaign were intensifying.
Israel is facing backlash for a deadly airstrike.
They killed dozens of people in a designated safe zone for displaced Palestinians.
There were incidents that were deeply questionable. And you could see the possibility that it did violate international law in one way or another. And I think that concern was widely shared throughout the administration, including by U.S. government lawyers who tend to be pretty conservative in making such judgments.
Yahya Sinwar, the military leader of Hamas, is suspected to be hiding out in the tunnels under Gaza.
There are new reports that Sinwar has said that he has the upper hand over Israel and that the civilian casualties seen in Gaza are, quote, necessary sacrifices.
Israel defended its actions, accusing Hamas of using civilians as human shields, which it has denied.
Innocent people died in Gaza. Nobody's saying otherwise. This is war, and war is ugly. That's things happen, but there was not a policy of deliberately targeting people there. We made mistakes. We are responsible for the mistakes we made. Many civilians were killed in that war, and that's tragic. The loss of life, any life, Israeli or Palestinian, is tragic.
But pressure was mounting on the U.S. to rein in Israel's assault.
The U.S. should revoke the license of exporting arms to Israel. There has to be an arms embargo, and then Netanyahu will listen.
Ambassador Hussam Zumlatt was making the case in the international media.
I was so looking for a word, a phrase to coin what is happening. What is it? Apocalyptic? Armageddon? The U.S. is capable to tap on their shoulder and tell them, change course. Enough. It's the U.S. that provides all these weapons and arms to Israel. We all know that the U.S. could stop this, and the fact that it didn't is a stain in the history of our international community, and certainly is a stain in the U.S. history.
Protests against American support for Israel were spreading across the world.
You're a dictator, do genocide, Joe! Tens of thousands of Palestinians! Genocide, Joe! It's got to go!
Demonstrators demand an end to U.S. support for Israel amid the humanitarian crisis and devastating death toll in Gaza.
To those who want to know whether the United States used all of its leverage, it's the superpower in this relationship, to basically avert a catastrophe, civilian deaths, humanitarian disaster in Gaza. What do you say to those who say that the president did not use all the tools he had at his disposal to basically avert a catastrophe?
I think the main argument that people make in saying President Biden should have exercised more leverage on the prime minister is that he should have stopped the flow of weapons to Israel. That was the main source of leverage that people tend to focus on. Stop sending weapons to Israel. And I understand the logic of that. I have my doubts about even if we had done that, it would have stopped Israel from taking the actions they did, but set that aside. President Biden decided he was not going to cut off weapons to Israel because they weren't just fighting Hamas. They were fighting Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Syrian militias, the Iraqi militias, and they were taking attacks from Iran itself. And President Biden wasn't going to leave Israel high and dry when it was facing a multi-front war.
The U.S. is ramping up diplomatic pressure surrounding hostage release and ceasefire talks involving Israel.
Throughout that summer, the Biden administration was focused on diplomacy, trying to get Israel and Hamas to agree to a ceasefire in Gaza. But Israel was planning to take the conflict to another level.
At a certain point in the summer last year, Defense Minister Gallant said to us, I have plenty of bullets, but I've run out of targets. He didn't have large targets to go after to achieve this breaking down of Hamas's military organizational capabilities.
Behind the scenes, the IDF believed they had made enough progress against Hamas to take on Hezbollah.
When we felt enough confidence that we can contain the situation in Gaza and to move enough forces to Lebanon, we did so. And we acted. And we acted very sharply, very precisely.
Israel's Mossad spy agency placed explosives in thousands of Hezbollah pages before they detonate.
They were carried by members of the Iran-backed Hezbollah terrorist group.
A funeral for those killed a day before is disrupted by another explosion. A wave of walkie-talkie blasts across Lebanon killed more than a dozen and injured hundreds.
For around a decade, Israeli intelligence had been putting in place a covert plan to attack Hezbollah with booby-trapped pagers and walkie-talkies. After the group became suspicious, the plan was activated.
The problem was use it or lose it. If you don't use it, you might lose it. And the decision was use it.
Once again, the United States was caught by surprise.
Basically, I think they sensed a window of opportunity and they seized it.
And the president's thought on that was what?
First it was, wait, why did you work with us on this whole ceasefire thing? So we did feel that they veered off down a different road than the one that we had been coordinating on and working together. But at the end of the day, in short order, dismantling the effective capability of a murderous terrorist organization that also has American blood on his hands is a good thing for the United States and a good thing for the region.
All in all, about 30 people died, including 2 children. Around 3,000 were injured.
With Hezbollah reeling, Israeli forces went after the group's missile capabilities.
The Pagers attack is, of course, a story for a James Bond movie, 007. It captured the world in terms of Israel's military abilities. But the real story is how Israel, through the Israeli military branch of intelligence, the same branch that failed on October 7, and the Israeli Air Force, that also failed on October 7, managed to basically destroy most of the inventories of missiles and rockets held by Hezbollah in their silos, in their bunkers, without those being launched against Israel.
Israel's Air Force could now take out Hezbollah's commanders. They got precise intelligence about the group's leader, Hassan Nasrallah.
15 minutes before we hit Nasrallah, I called Secretary Austin. And I said, the plans are on the air. We are going to kill this bastard. And he said it's going to create a major event in the Middle East. I said, Mr. Secretary, this guy is a bad guy.
A stunning escalation in Israel's fight against the Iran-backed terror group Hezbollah. Tonight, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said his country had settled the score with the killing of the group's longtime leader, Hassan Nasrallah.
The Iranians threatening that the Israelis had opened up the gates of hell. This was a major momentum shift across the entire Middle East.
The Biden administration message to you was, don't escalate, let's not risk a regional war. It doesn't seem as though the Israelis really heeded that advice.
Israel felt that it had to do what it had to do. Again, you have to understand the psychology of Israelis after October 7th. I think the main psychological gap between us and the administration was that we felt this is an existential situation. After October 7th, we cannot end this war with Hamas standing, with any of our neighbors being able to hit us this way. Nowhere, no more.
After Nasrallah's death, there was no major response from Hezbollah.
If you would have told me in 2022 that in the days that we will assassinate and send Nasrallah to hell, that there will not be one missile over Tel Aviv. I will ask you, what have you drunk? What have you smoked? It seems like not possible.
The collapse of Hezbollah was possible not just because Israel was very clever, but also because Israel was willing to carry out the kind of operations that other countries might not do. The kind of impunity with which Israel operated in Gaza without getting any pushback from Europe or the United States carried into Lebanon as well. There are large numbers of civilians who were killed. For instance, in the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, which happened with a very massive bomb dropped on South Beirut. So the assassinations, the pager attacks, etc., were successful, largely because Israel was willing to accept the civilian casualties and the collateral damage that it would involve.
We are not aiming at civilians. We are not aiming at innocent people.
But civilians are dying.
James, you are right. This is the environment we are living in. I would prefer to fight an enemy who prefers to fight me with his weapons and not using his own civilians as human shields.
4 days after the assassination of Nasrallah, the retaliation came, direct from Iran.
Iran has just launched a retaliatory missile attack targeting Israel.
The supreme leader decides to order the Islamic Republic to enter the war again and attack Israel, full-blown.
Israel says its air defense is taking out most of the incoming missiles.
نیروهای مسلح ما در 2-3 شب قبل هم یک کار کاملا قانونی و مشروع بود.
The world is now waiting to see how Israel responds.
This time, the Israelis went much further. They took out Iranian missile defenses around Tehran and around some of the nuclear sites. They took out Iranian missile operations, and by taking out the air defenses, the message was, we could own your airspace, so don't tempt us.
Iran's ring of fire was disintegrating across the entire region, with a major setback in Gaza.
One of the world's most hunted men is dead. Hamas military leader Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind of the October 7th attacks, was killed by Israeli troops in southern Gaza.
And in Syria, where Iran's ally, the dictator Bashar al-Assad, was forced from power.
Assad has fled to Moscow, and it is now a coalition of rebel groups that are in charge.
The whole ring was broken. Hamas was destroyed by us. Hezbollah is now isolated within Lebanon. It doesn't have any connection to Iran because the bridge was broken. The Iranians cannot send him through land anything. And without the ring, Iran became much weaker.
A number of factors, all in the span of just a few short months, completely upended the game in the Middle East when it came to the shadow war between Israel and Iran. Iran's proxies are on their back. Iran's client, Assad, is gone. Iran's air defenses are gone. And so this is just a different moment in the Middle East than what we inherited when we walked into office.
For Benjamin Netanyahu, it was an opportunity to do what he'd been advocating for decades.
Deterrence must now be reinforced with prevention, immediate and effective prevention. This is not a hypothesis, it is fact.
They're 6 months away from being about 90% of having the enriched uranium for an atom bomb.
Weeks away from having the fissile material.
Iran lied.
The path was finally clear to attack Iran's nuclear program.
The horizon opened for Israelis and suddenly realized that, having hit hard on the Iranian axis, on the tentacles, we can now aim at what many people call the head of the snake, which is Iran.
Now, if you listen to the Israelis, they will tell you that as soon as Hezbollah fell, they began receiving a new stream of intelligence suggesting that the Iranians had made a decision to race for a bomb and had built a separate cell that most Iranian leaders didn't even know about that was reviving the old bomb project. They informed the Americans of their intelligence. I have yet to find any American officials who believe that Iran was racing for a bomb.
In November, Netanyahu issued a secret directive to his military to begin planning for an attack. But they needed help. Only the US had bombs capable of destroying Iran's underground nuclear facilities. With 2 months until a new US administration, Netanyahu decided to wait.
So I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you very much. And
thank you.
Benjamin, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
you,
President. Thank you, Dom. Thank you. Mr. President, I want to first thank you for inviting me again to the White House. You've been a remarkable friend of the State of Israel. You stand by us. You're standing with us.
Then Trump went in a surprising direction.
Wait a minute. Wait. We're having direct talks with Iran. And
Trump announces that he is going to open up negotiations with the Iranians to see how it goes.
And I think everybody agrees that doing a deal would be preferable.
You can just see Netanyahu's discomfort in his seat. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. He was supposed to have, in the Oval Office, the great Iran hawk.
But it's getting to be very dangerous territory. And hopefully
you don't have to be a great psychologist to see how unhappy Netanyahu was with the idea of another prolonged negotiation.
Officials from the U.S. and Iran holding high-stakes...
A few days later, in Oman, negotiations began between the U.S. and Iran.
Both sides said going into these talks that they were looking for some sort of deal. The Iranians want those crushing economic sanctions lifted. The Americans want to see restrictions on Iran's nuclear program.
You know, we started negotiations in good faith, and Iran was sincere in its desire to arrive at a conclusion in terms of its nuclear program. From the American side, they were also showing signs that they were also eager to find an agreement with Iran.
Will you give us the readout on the Iran talks, sir?
I think they're going okay.
What was your... What
I can't tell you because nothing matters until you get it done.
From Rome, where this morning Iran and the United States are sitting down for a new round of talks on Iran's nuclear program.
A lot is at stake, and there's every sense that time is ticking for these sides to reach a deal.
Trump had given a 60-day deadline to agree to a deal.
The Israeli government was absolutely convinced that the Iranians are just trying to stall the negotiations. They're just playing for time, said the Israelis to their American counterparts.
The president means what he says, which is they cannot have a bomb.
As talks progressed, Trump's chief negotiator, Steve Witkoff, suggested a compromise was possible.
So this is going to be much about verification on the enrichment program.
Witkoff publicly said, well, maybe the Iranians could go back to the same kind of enrichment levels they had in the Obama deal. Well, everybody leapt on that, me included, and wrote stories saying he's talking about reviving the Obama-era deal. This was not what President Trump wanted to be reading. The administration took a hard turn and said, no enrichment, zero enrichment in Iran.
For the Iranians, this was a red line.
Dismantling of all Iranian enrichment facilities, which was impossible. They knew it's not going to happen. Trump is telling Iranians, a nation with 7,000 years of civilization and history, he tells them, when you negotiate with me, unconditional surrender. Of course, Iranians would not accept it.
The sixth round of Iran-US nuclear talks is planned as the two sides remain locked in a standoff.
Trump gave the Iranians 60 days, and during those months, I heard from people here in Israel around the Prime Minister, they kept on saying, watch out for the 60 days.
Israel's military was now preparing an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities.
During the discussions and deliberations in the cabinet, the closed cabinet, and with the chief of staff, Netanyahu was very clear. He said, go do your stuff, make sure it's a stunning success, and upon that success, I will bring President Trump. So he knew his thought, gamble, whatever, is if Israel succeeds, if it is indeed a stunning operation, President Trump would want to be part of the success.
Moments ago, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival.
More than 200 fighter jets were aimed at Iran's main enrichment facility.
Iran state TV says the strikes killed several top military leaders and nuclear scientists.
We took them by surprise, and we attacked all these targets simultaneously and repeatedly for 2 weeks.
They caught many of the military leadership, the head of the Air Force and others, asleep in their own beds. The Israelis put missiles right into their bedrooms and killed them.
It was a war which was based totally on intelligence. Israel succeeded to kill probably more than 12 very sophisticated, the hardcore of weaponization group scientists.
We will not have a second Holocaust, a nuclear Holocaust.
انشاءالله با قدرت عمل خواهد شد و با اونها مماشاتی نخواهیم کرد.
Iran's retaliation has begun.
This time, when Iran retaliated, some of its missiles got through Israel's defenses.
At least 5 people have been killed and dozens injured in the latest round of missile strikes launched by Iran.
Iran accused the U.S. of using the negotiations as cover.
And I could hear people are chanting, "Death to America," who they say enabled the war.
When the Israelis attacked us, that showed that the Americans have approved this. Now we have realized that they have been cooperative in the course of aggression from day one. How can anybody else trust the Americans when they say something?
No current Trump administration officials would agree to be interviewed. At the time, the president said that the U.S. had nothing to do with Israel's strikes.
I've never found any evidence that the Israelis got a green light from the White House. I think they got a yellow caution light, which was, you go do this, you may be in it for yourself. As the Israelis were increasingly successful, Trump began, in that usual Donald Trump way, to want a piece of the victory.
We're doing pretty well. Right now, we're doing pretty well. Remember, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple.
I gave Iran 60 days, and they said no. And the 61st, you saw what happened.
And meanwhile, a back channel developed about whether the U.S. would now be willing, since the Israelis had cleared the way, to go after Natanz and Fordo.
On June 19th, President Trump's spokeswoman said he was taking time to decide whether to join the war.
I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks.
From the beginning, that 2-week utterance from President Trump was tactical deception. He had already approved the plan. He signed the execute order the next afternoon, and the planes were in the air the next day.
The United States has entered Israel's war with Iran. American stealth bombers and submarines launched a massive coordinated attack.
Unprecedented strikes against Iran's nuclear enrichment sites.
Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace.
President Trump and I often say, peace through strength. First comes strength, then comes peace.
For decades, Iran thought that it could say death to America and death to Israel without actually fighting these countries. Now it knows how fighting Israel looks like. It also knows that even Donald Trump, who had banked so much of his political career on not wanting to start forever wars or not wanting to wars, he would not hesitate from attacking Iran.
After the U.S. airstrikes, Iran and Israel continued fighting, despite Trump declaring a ceasefire.
You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
But soon, the war came to an end.
That bombardment is a crime. We are for dialogue. We want to engage, but the Americans have, failed the test. They have failed the exam. So they have to come and explain to us as to why they chose, war instead of diplomacy.
The extent of the damage to Iran's nuclear facilities remained unclear, but Israel was confident the program had been set back.
It will take them, I don't know, years to rebuild it. And if the Iranians decide to rebuild a facility which we will be sure is connected to their nuclear military project, we will destroy it. As simple as that.
In the months that followed, Israel would agree to a ceasefire with Hamas and bring home the remaining hostages. Around 90% of Gaza's population had been displaced. Tens of thousands killed. And the Israeli military was occupying more than half the territory. The threat from Iran's proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, had been pushed back. But it would soon become clear that Netanyahu was not done with Iran. In late December, Netanyahu arrived at Mar-a-Lago with fresh concerns about Iran. Israeli intelligence claimed that the regime had been rapidly replenishing its ballistic missile stockpiles.
This is what became Bibi Netanyahu's obsession, because some of those missiles had made it through during the 12-day war, hit Tel Aviv and so forth, and he did not want to let that inventory build up. And he begins lobbying on that point.
We've never had a friend, even close, a friend, as President Trump in the White House.
Netanyahu makes a very strong case that he needs to go after the missiles, that he'd love to do it with the United States. It's not clear to us yet whether Trump was sold on this at that time.
Iran may be behaving badly. It hasn't been confirmed. But if it's confirmed, look, they know the consequences. Consequences will be very powerful, maybe more powerful than the last time.
Then, in January,
the protests in Iran have grown, the crackdown more deadly.
dramatic developments inside Iran started moving Trump towards taking action.
President Trump is now warning that if Iran kills peaceful protesters, the U.S. will intervene.
The administration all of a sudden begins a huge military buildup around Iran. And the topic matter turns from human rights to the nuclear program again.
Although neither Trump nor Netanyahu were presenting new evidence of an imminent nuclear threat, satellite imagery was showing cleanup work at sites that had been bombed in June. Along with an aircraft carrier, Trump once again sent Steve Witkoff, as well as his son-in-law Jared Kushner, armed with even bigger demands than the last time.
We're putting absolutely maximalist goals on the table, and unless you come to the table urgently and sign, I'm going to attack you. And there was absolutely no evidence that anything of consequence had happened with Iran's nuclear program between June of 2025 and January of 2026, which would warrant this kind of urgency.
I'd rather make a deal. It's got to be a good deal. No nuclear weapons, no missiles, no this, no that, all the different things that you want. But some people worry that they've been very dishonest with us over the years, right?
Behind the scenes at the White House, Netanyahu continued to press for going to war.
Netanyahu comes with a message to the president, which is, we're going to go ahead. And by the way, when we go ahead, go ask your own guys what's going to happen to you, because the Iranians are going to respond by hitting U.S. bases. So you might as well join us at the beginning, because you'll end up joining us in the first 12 hours anyway. Donald Trump's answer was essentially, okay, we'll do it together.
Israel's defense minister has confirmed it's launched an attack on Iran.
U.S. strikes on Iran are now underway.
Within the first 24 hours, the strikes had killed Iran's supreme leader and other top officials.
The supreme leader of the Iranian terrorist regime is dead.
U.S. and Israel pummeling Iranian missile bases deep underground.
A reported airstrike hit a girls' school over the weekend.
The regime began launching missiles into Israel and at U.S. bases in the region.
Strikes in Doha, where the Al Udeid Air Base is located. 6 Iowa Army reservists killed in Sunday's strike.
Intensifying military conflict, which has spiraled into a full-blown regional war.
We are defending ourselves. We have not started this war of aggression. This war has imposed on us, and we will continue to defend ourselves to the best of our abilities.
With the fighting intensifying, the Trump administration has offered differing justifications for the war.
The more you listen to the rationales, the more confusing it gets, because the rationales keep changing.
Iran's a very powerful country. They were going to take over the Middle East. If we did not hit them, they were going to take over the Middle East.
The imminent threat was that we knew that if Iran was attacked, and we believed they would be attacked, that they would immediately come after us.
Iran had a conventional gun to our head as they tried to lie their way to a nuclear bomb.
This all raises the question, is this a war of opportunity or of necessity?
This is a war of choice. We don't have any evidence that the Iranians were preparing to strike Israel or the United States. This was a preventive, not a preemptive war. And in international law, that is considered completely off limits, because if you had a world of nothing but preventive wars, you'd have war all the time.
So there is this question here, whether this is in fact a war of choice.
Yes, I know all these slogans. If it's not imminent, it's a war of choice. No. This notion that if the other side is not killing you, you don't kill him, and you let him the time to prepare you be killed in the future, and you don't do anything because it's not imminent, it's stupid. This is the mistake that we did before the 7th of October. It was not imminent, so we let them to be stronger. And then when they felt they are strong enough, they surprise us. At least Israel is not going to behave that way in the future.
I mean, doesn't that fly in the face of what international law is all about?
Maybe, but we know what is the alternative.
In recent days, Israel has begun a new offensive against the remnants of Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Dozens of people, more than 50 in fact, have been killed.
Hundreds of thousands of people have been on the move.
At what point does this war end?
When both sides, the Americans and the Israelis, will sit together and say, they are weak enough. The regime, whoever will be the regime, cannot harm not Israel, not the neighborhood, not America for sure. What we want to destroy is the ability of the Iranians to attack others.
Speaking on American television, the Iranian leadership has remained defiant.
They have, started this war unprovoked, unwarranted, illegally, and what we are doing is legal act of self-defense, and we have every right to do that.
President Trump is now threatening Iran with complete destruction and has promised a new regional order.
There is a new Middle East being made because the series of wars since October 7th has actually broken the old Middle East. But the result of these wars has not been satisfactory. There is not a peace treaty or an end game for Gaza. There's not an end to Lebanon that all Lebanese see as good closure. There is no end to Syria yet, and there is no end to Iran yet. You're not going to end up with peace and prosperity without actually laying the political foundations for it. The military foundations is fine. Many people are celebrating it, the destruction of the axis of resistance. But what is coming in its stead? What's the political settlement that's going to heal these wounds? It doesn't exist yet.
For more on this and other Frontline programs, visit our website at pbs.org/frontline. Frontline's Remaking the Middle East is available on Amazon Prime Video.